Every empire that fell into debt believed they were the exception. Greece thought being part of the Eurozone made them untouchable. Argentina believed endless IMF bailouts would buy them time. And now, the United States, the world's reserve currency holder, is repeating the same mistakes on a scale humanity has never seen before. The global debt clock ticks like a time bomb, spinning faster each year, but somehow the danger feels invisible. Politicians call it stimulus. Economists call it modern finance. But history has another name for it: decline. Governments spend what they don't have. Central banks print to fill the gaps. Citizens are told to consume, not to question. It always starts this way: confidence high, markets booming, debt cheap. But there's a rhythm beneath the noise, a pattern older than modern banking itself. Rome's silver coins were once pure, until emperors began shaving off the edges. Spain's empire glittered with gold until it drowned in borrowed silver. And today, the same story plays out in digital form, measured not in metal, but in numbers too large to comprehend. The pattern never changes, only the actors do. Every great nation reaches a moment when it mistakes credit for wealth and borrowing for growth, when it believes it can outsmart arithmetic, and that debt somehow doesn't matter. The question isn't whether the United States can escape history's pattern. It's whether any empire ever truly could. Because when you look back far enough, prosperity built on borrowing has only one ending: collapse, denial, and then silence. Every debt spiral begins with optimism. Politicians promise progress, investors chase record highs, and citizens believe that more money means more security. Borrowing doesn't look dangerous when interest rates are low and everything seems stable. Debt fuels roads, welfare, defense, and dreams. People feel wealthier, and the illusion of endless growth takes hold. But every borrowed dollar carries a hidden cost: the promise that one day it must be repaid. In the early stages, repayment seems easy. Economies grow faster than interest. Governments refinance old loans with new ones. But over time, the debt pile grows faster than income, and interest becomes the biggest line item in the budget. To cover it, nations borrow more, not to invest, but to survive. This is where optimism turns into dependency. Leaders tell their people everything is under control. But behind the scenes, the system is feeding on itself. Economists call this the debt trap. Like quicksand, it feels stable until you try to move. Every policy to escape, more loans, more printing, more inflation, only sinks the nation deeper. At first, inflation is ignored. Then it's blamed on external forces. By the time the public feels the full effect, rising prices, shrinking wages, collapsing savings, it's too late. The spiral has begun. And history proves once it begins, it almost never stops. This is a debt spiral blueprint, a repeating cycle of denial, expansion, panic, and erosion. Greece followed it. Argentina perfected it. And now the United States, with all its might and technology, is walking the same path, convinced that its size, its currency, and its power make it immune. But every empire thought the same. Every one of them believed that gravity didn't apply to them. The blueprint always begins innocently. Governments borrow to fund progress. Roads, hospitals, pensions, all justified in the name of prosperity. But the spending never stops. Political cycles reward short-term pleasure over long-term discipline. Debt grows faster than growth, and when crisis hits, borrowing accelerates. This is exactly how Greece's tragedy unfolded. In the early 2000s, Greece entered the Eurozone, gaining access to cheap credit. For the first time, it could borrow at interest rates similar to Germany's. The result? A spending boom. Public wages doubled, social programs expanded, and borrowing became the solution to every problem. For nearly a decade, the illusion worked. GDP rose, tourism flourished, and Athens hosted the 2004 Olympics as proof of success. But behind the celebration, debt was quietly stacking, hidden through creative accounting and swaps arranged with foreign banks. When the global financial crisis hit in 2008, the mask slipped. Greece's true debt numbers shocked the world. Over 180% of GDP. Investors panicked. Borrowing costs exploded, and the country was locked out of credit markets. What followed was brutal. The The European Union and IMF stepped in with bailouts, but demanded harsh austerity in return. Pensions were cut, taxes hiked, public sector jobs slashed. Streets filled with protests and chaos. The bailout kept Greece alive, but at a cost: its economic freedom. Decisions about Greek budgets, policies, and spending were no longer made in Athens, but in Brussels and Frankfurt. Greece didn't collapse physically, but it lost something deeper: sovereignty. Its future was written by creditors. That is the real consequence of the debt spiral. When control shifts from the people to the lenders, the nation remains standing, but hollow from within. Argentina's story is different, but more tragic because it repeats endlessly. Since the 1950s, Argentina has defaulted 9 times. Each time, it promised reform. Each time, it repeated the same mistakes. The cycle became cultural. Overspend, borrow, inflate, collapse, repeat. The nation that was once among the world's wealthiest now faces inflation above 200%. Its currency worth less than the paper it's printed on. The cause? Chronic reliance on short-term fixes. Instead of addressing structural waste or corruption, Argentina printed more money to cover deficits. The peso's value evaporated, and people rushed to buy U.S. dollars, not for investment, but for survival. Banks restricted withdrawals. Supermarkets changed prices daily, and entire industries began dealing in foreign currencies. The government blamed speculators and foreign interests, but the truth was internal. Decades of borrowing to fund political promises without productive growth. IMF bailouts temporarily stabilized things but created dependency. Each loan came with conditions: spending cuts, reforms, new taxes. Each reform sparked protests, toppled governments, and reset the cycle. Argentina's tragedy isn't just its debt. It's that crisis became normal. Generations have grown up expecting economic collapse like seasons. The nation survives, but it never escapes. It is living proof that once the debt spiral becomes part of a country's identity, escape is almost impossible. And then there is the United States, the final stage of the blueprint, the superpower testing the limits of history. With more than $35 trillion in debt and annual deficits in the trillions, the U.S. spends more servicing interest than on national defense. Every year, Congress debates raising the debt ceiling, not to fix the problem, but to postpone the reckoning. Both major parties talk about responsibility, but neither can afford to stop spending. The public demands benefits, markets demand liquidity, and politicians demand re-election. The dollar's global dominance allows America to borrow in its own currency, something Greece and Argentina could only dream of. This privilege delays collapse, but it also feeds complacency. As the Federal Reserve prints to stabilize markets, inflation eats away at purchasing power. Between 2020 and 2023, the U.S. printed more money than in the previous century combined. The result was predictable: asset bubbles, soaring prices, and growing inequality. The debt continues to grow not because of necessity, but addiction. When the world begins to question the dollar's stability, as China, Russia, and others already are, confidence will waver. The same confidence that once made the dollar supreme could vanish, as investors demand higher returns to hold U.S. debt. The danger isn't an immediate collapse, but slow erosion, higher inflation, weaker currency, shrinking global influence. The blueprint always ends this way. The empire that believed it was untouchable begins to fade, not with a crash, but with exhaustion. Every nation that follows the debt spiral reaches the same crossroad. When debt outgrows the economy, leaders have 2 choices: default or devalue. Default means admitting failure. Devaluation hides it behind inflation. Greece chose austerity and lost control. Argentina chose inflation and lost stability. The U.S., facing the same dilemma, seems to be choosing the quiet path, inflating its way out while pretending everything is fine. But inflation is just a hidden default. It doesn't erase debt, it transfers it from governments to citizens. Every rise in price, every shrinking paycheck, every dollar that buys less than before is the cost of denial. History shows this erosion clearly. Rome diluted its silver. France inflated its paper assignats. Weimar Germany printed its mark into oblivion. The pattern is eternal. When debt exceeds reason, money loses meaning. The end of the debt spiral is never dramatic. It's slow, invisible, and psychological. People adjust, prices rise, and savings vanish, not overnight, but over years. The collapse isn't in buildings or bombs. It's in trust. Once people stop believing their currency holds value, the system unravels. Confidence is the first casualty, followed by stability, then power. Greece lost its sovereignty. Argentina lost its credibility. The United States risks losing its privilege, the power to borrow endlessly because the world believes in its currency. If that belief fades, so does everything built upon it. Empires don't fall when the money runs out. They fall when people stop believing it's worth anything. So what does the end look like? Not an explosion, but an awakening. A gradual realization that the debt-fueled prosperity of decades past was never sustainable. A generation that inherits bills instead of assets. And a system that keeps printing hope on paper that buys less each year. The debt spiral isn't a mystery. It's a mirror. The question isn't whether history will repeat itself, but when we'll finally learn from it. If Greece shows how sovereignty fades and Argentina how credibility dies, then America shows how denial thrives. The blueprint has never changed. Only the excuses have. Every nation in debt believes it's different. Everyone thinks it can borrow its way to eternity. But numbers don't negotiate, and history doesn't forget. So ask yourself, if every empire before us followed the same path, convinced it was immune, what makes us think this time will be any different?